If you're at home, feel free to pause this and take a look at these graphs and make sure you did okay. Just the other two. All right, let's get our notes set up. Okay, our learning target for today is I can describe the slope of a linear equation. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Is this 8th grade stuff or is it already back to college?
We're going to be on 8th grade standards probably for another 5 weeks, 6 weeks. And then we'll go back and forth between 7th and 8th grade geometry standards. Yeah. All right. So let's take a look here. Let's talk about some vocabulary first. Yeah, go ahead. So let's talk about what slope is, just so that you know what we're doing. Because we're going to be describing graphs in different ways over the next couple of days, and the first way is slope. So a slope describes the direction and steepness of a line. Okay. Now, we always use the same variable to represent slope, and that is m. So we always use a lowercase m to represent slope. And really what slope is it's, I'm going to write this formula down, but you don't have to memorize this yet. And we won't really be using it yet today, but I want you to have it in your notes along with the definition. We can also, so really it's the change in your y over the change in your x. And we have like a little shortcut here. We call this the rise over the run. And that will make more sense in just a moment. Yeah, Elizabeth?
Next to the y next, is it on the left side of 2 and on the right side of 1?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We will dive into this equation a lot, but not today. We're just going to keep it real simple today, and then we'll get into that equation in coming days. Okay, so let's make sure that we know that. So this right here is the variable that we use for slope. So anytime you see an m, we're talking about slope. It would make more sense if it was an s, but remember s is not a very good variable to use because it looks like a 5. And then this, quite literally, this looks all fancy and hard to understand. It's really not. This is just the change in y over the change in x. So you're finding out how much y is changing, and you're finding out how much x is changing, and you're putting them over each other. Okay. Now this is in your notes, and you're going to want to refer back to that as needed. Going to put a little nice box around it so that we don't lose it in our notes. Okay. Now this will make a lot more sense once I show you how to do this. So let's get to it. Let's go ahead and do an example. I'm going to do 2 examples and then we're going to discuss it. All right. Okay, so here's our line. And we are going to describe slope with that ratio of the change in y over the change in x. I'll give you a second to get that line in your notes, and then we'll discuss it. And I'll show you how to find the slope. Okay, so the process here for finding the slope of a line is you just pick any 2 points where the line crosses exactly at the crosshairs. So let me actually zoom in quite significantly on this so you can see really well. Okay, I'm just going to pick 2 lines where the graph crosses exactly. So I can see it crosses exactly right here. This point is -2, -2. It also crosses exactly here. Now, what you're going to find out here as we go through these is it actually does not matter at all which 2 points on the line you choose. You will get the same slope no matter what, okay? So let's go ahead and I'm going to make a little triangle here connecting those points. Okay. So I made a little triangle, and just a reminder, to find the slope, it's your change in y over your change in x. So to find my change in y, that's how far up and down you're going, I'm going to count how many boxes. 1, 2, 3. So my change in y is 3. I'm going to put that on the top of my ratio. Now I need to find my change in x. So I'm going to count my boxes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my change in x is 6. If I reduce this, I get 1/2. This, my friends, is your slope. It is your change in y. Oops, you can't see it. It's your change in y over your change in x. Now, if I had picked different points, like if I had picked this point right here and that point, then it would have been 2/4. 2/4 is also 1/2. Okay, so it really does not matter which 2 points you choose to find your slope. So let me just make sure we're good. This number up here was your change in y. And we sometimes refer to this as the rise. Really, it should be the rise or the fall because you're going to go up and you're going to go down. Yes, ma'am?
What if, like, the line's different?
I'm going to show you another example of a different one so you can see. Yeah, definitely. And then right here, this number was your change in x, which we call the run because it's the horizontal change. So you had your change in y, you had your change in x, and that's our slope. Okay. Okay, so as long as you can remember your change in y over your change in x, you're going to be great. Really, you can also say it's the rise over the run. How much do you go up? How much do you go over? Okay. Let's try another example. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so that you guys can see. Okay. All right. Okay, so if you're wondering where it crosses the y-axis at 3. It crosses the x-axis at 1. I know sometimes it's hard to see up here and then get this exact line on your paper. So make sure that it crosses the y-axis at 3 and the x-axis at 1. And just to keep things straight, I always, when I make my triangle, I always do it like on top of the line, not underneath the line. I think that will really help to streamline things if you guys remember to always do it on the top of the line. Yes, ma'am?
So it has to cross the point over the y at 3 and x is 1?
Yeah, so and just as a reference to help you graph it, I did that. I want you to make sure it crosses the y-axis at 3 and the x-axis at 1.
Okay.
Yeah. And once you have it, you can pick 2 points where it crosses exactly. And actually, you guys already know that it crosses exactly at y is 3, x is 1. But I'm going to choose these 2 points here. And I'm going to make my triangle. Always make it on top of my line. Okay. Well, this line looks a little bit different than this one because this one's kind of like going up. This one's like going down. So it's going to make more sense for us to talk about that change in x first. And if we do our change in x, we can see that we're going over 1, 2 spaces. Now notice on this line up here, we went up 3 spaces and then over. Whenever you have to go down, so we went over and we're going to go down, then that's considered negative. We had to move in the negative direction to find our change in y. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes here. And I'm going to say that it's a -6 because I had to go down. So anytime you go count down, that's a negative. Now just a reminder, to find your slope, you're going to have the change in y, which in this case is -6, over your change in x, which is 2. And we do want to make sure we reduce that, so that's going to be -3. So this right here is your slope. Okay. Now I want to point out, remember how we were talking just a second ago about how this line's kind of pointing up? And notice that the slope of it is positive. This line is kind of like pointing down, and this slope is negative. So I'm going to draw you a little picture. I'm going to flip my page over and draw you a couple little pictures to help you remember which slopes should be positive and which slopes should be negative. Okay. So this is just a little tip to help you. And hopefully if you're remembering that when you have to count down, it's negative, you should always get the correct sign on your slope. But to be doubly sure, give you a fun little way to remember when the slope is positive and when the slope is negative. I'm just going to draw in two coordinate planes here so that we can take a look at positive slope versus negative slope. All right. Let's see, where does that cross? Oh, that's right. All right, so here's a slope. One of them is positive and one of them is negative. Very quickly, I am going to find the slope of these. For this one, I'm just going to pick 2 points where it crosses exactly. Okay, so the change in y is 2, the change in x is 2, which means my slope is 1. Okay, and notice that it is positive. So this slope right here is considered positive because as you look at it, you got to read it like a book. Always read it from left to right when you're reading a graph. And you can see that as you go from left to right, your line is going up, okay? So the way that we're going to remember that is Mr. Positivity, okay? Mr. Positivity, everything is looking up. So there's Mr. Positivity. He's like, woo, life is great. I'm on my way up in this world. Nothing can go wrong. Mr. Positivity. Yes, Sienna?
I can't draw a cut line and I just want a negative slope.
So I can tell you that it crosses exactly the y-axis at 1 and the x-axis at -1. And because this one has a slope of 1, it's going to basically go exactly through the corners of all the boxes. I'll try to zoom in just a little bit too so you can see better. Okay, so that's Mr. Positivity. And now I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Negativity here. But before we do that, let's find the slope. So I'm going to pick 2 points where it crosses exactly. Okay, and my change in x is 1. My change in y, since I'm going down here, this is -2. And remember for the slope, you have your change in y, which is -2, over your change in x, which is 1. So when you reduce this, you get -2. So for this, our slope is -2. So here is Mr. Negativity. Let me draw him. Man, Mr. Negativity is having a bad, bad day. For Mr. Negativity, nothing is looking up. He's just going down, down, down into a negative spiral of sadness. And so this is Mr. Negativity, okay? And notice that for Mr. Negativity, when you look at the graph from left to right, you're gonna see that that line is going down as you go from left to right. And that is how you know that it's negative. Okay, so remember, if it's Mr. Positivity, if it's going up from left to right, everything's looking up, everything's good, your slope should be positive. Mr. Negativity, if you're going from left to right, everything is horrible. Everything is looking down, okay? So that's just a kind of a way to help you kind of remember when it should be positive and when it should be negative. So make your triangle, find your change in y over your change in x, and then just double check this and make sure that if it's going up, it's positive, if it's going down, it's negative. Okay, I'm gonna give you a couple to practice here. Oh, that would be pretty hard for you guys to find the slope if you can't even see it. I'm just going to put some dots on my paper to remember where to put that. My line. In the last class, they kept getting it, they kept putting the change in x over the change in y and not getting the correct slope. So make sure that you're doing the change in y over the change in x. Would it help you if I gave you the name of a couple points so that you know what to graph? Okay, here, let's do that. This is 1, 4. This is 5, 2. This point right here is -3, 6. And I'll come over here too. This is -2, -2. This is 1, -1. And 4, 0. Okay, I put a few points on there just to help you out. Oh, you guys can't even see that other one. Goodness gracious. All right, go ahead and try to graph, or not graph them. Go ahead and try to find the slope of those lines. Remembering that it's the change in y over the change in x. in my triangle so we can talk about it. Did anyone get a slope for number 1? They want to share? It's okay if you're wrong too. No one in my class was right. Go ahead, Macy.
I got 1/2.
1/2? Okay, anybody else? Rhea? -2/4? Okay. 2/3? Okay. Ishan?
-1/2.
-1/2? What'd you get, Alan? -2/3? What'd you get, Sienna? -1/2? And Praneesh? -1/2? Okay, so like I said, variety of answers. Don't have to worry about being wrong. Okay, so let's take a look and see here. I think part of the problem is that it's kind of hard to look up here at the TV screen to graph it correctly. So feel free, when you're doing your homework tonight, to just zoom in on that graph so you can really see what's happening. Okay, so your change in x is 4. Then you go down. So this should be -2. You're dropping down 2. So my slope is going to be, my change in y is -2 over my change in x, which is 4. So this should be -1/2. And if you compare it with Mr. Negativity, it's going down. So as you look at this graph from left to right, you can see that it's going down. Yes, Sienna?
I kind of did the opposite. I went up 2 and went to left 4 times. So that would still count, right?
Yes, it would. I try to urge people to always make sure they put their triangle on the top of the line instead of on the bottom. Just because then you can just remember that if you have to go down for y, then it's going to be negative, and it just seems to be more streamlined. But you can definitely do it that way as well. But just when it's backwards like that, you're going to be going up for your y and in the negative direction for your x, so it's going to be negative still. Okay. All right, let's take a look at this one. I'm going to do my triangle right here. What'd you guys get for this? Macy? -1/3. What'd you get, Sienna? 1/3. Rhea? 1/3. Let's check it out. Okay, let's see. I'm going up 2, so it's positive, and then over 6. So my change in y is 2. My change in x is 6, and I can reduce that down to 1/3. And because when I look at my line and I go from left to right, I can see that that line is going up, so it should be positive. Okay. All right, so you just have a few on your homework tonight. You're going to notice that there are letters there for your points. That's just so you know which line you're doing the graph of, or you're finding the slope of. I think you're just finding the slope of 4 lines tonight on your homework. Yes, ma'am. Oh, Candy. If I owe you candy, come see me. If I owe you candy for getting 100% last week, come on down and see me.